Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is December 15th, and this is another of our bi-weekly SIG CLI calls. My name is Maciej, and I'll be your host today. And as it turns out, that is actually the last call that I'm leading as a chair for SIG CLI, as it was discussed in October, if I remember correctly. I should probably have checked that before the call. I will be stepping down as a SIG chair with the end of this year. Worry not, I'll still be around. I'm still leaving my technical lead hat on. So I'll be more on the side of technical arrangements, discussions, thoughts, rather than the organizational side of things. We have amazing Eddie, Katrina, Sean in the charge of the SIG. So I'm very happy that they are running the SIG. Actually, Eddie, I will be helping with the annual report. And let's not forget, I'm still running another SIG apps, which also be doing the annual report. So I'll be there for this one still. From the announcement side, Kubernetes 1.23 was released last week, which means that the code freeze was lifted. So feel free to ship whatever you want to do for 1.24, which is also related with the first of the topics of our today's discussion. This Friday, there's a Kubernetes contributor celebration happening. It's afternoon, evening, my time as in European, and it's probably around noon for folks in the East Coast, and around this time morning for the West Coasters. As part of the many initiatives, many events happening, I will be doing a SIG CLI, SIG apps deep dive, depending on who will show up, what kind of questions I will have. It will be a AMA / deep dive / whatever you want to do. Free hand session. And at the same time, an important thing, we will be giving away contributor awards. So feel free to tune in for contributor celebration this Friday. One last announcement. KubeCon Europe CFP proposal is also due this Friday midnight, and I think that midnight is PST, although I might be wrong. But you can check it out under the link. If I remember correctly, Sean put it there as well. So, Eddie, Sean, Katrina, did I miss any other announcements?
No, the one thing we can bring up is Paris Pittman, who's on steering, has been pretty adamant about getting funding for things from the CNCF to help the project. So if anyone has any wild and crazy ideas, what we could do with hiring people or money, feel free to share those, because Paris wants us to think wild. So I proposed a person funded by the CNCF, dedicated to onboarding new contributors, and see how that goes.
Yeah, that would be great. We should definitely put that thing in the annual reports, since we can go crazy, and usually we put those kind of information what we would want to achieve. Annual report seems like the best to express those. So I'm hoping that sometime in January, we will be reaching out to you, and we'll do either some kind of a annual report preview, review, with possibilities for everyone to add additional inputs for the report. But we'll make sure that this will be announced properly upfront, but that will be sometime next year. There will be some other interesting things happening next year, but we just need to crystallize them a little bit more. So not to give away too much of the stuff yet. Do we have any new folks on the call? I'm quickly scrolling through the list and I think I've seen all the names, but I might be wrong. If you're new to the call or you weren't here for a while, feel free to pick up the mic and introduce yourself. Okay, hearing none. So I guess we can jump on to 124 planning. So folks put together a couple of topics and ideas that we know that we will be working over the next release. First one is a evergreen, which is moving kubectl out of the tree. With the recent discussion, we are hoping that with the help from SIG release, we will push forward the release build pipeline such that it will be possible to build kubectl out of the separate repo. Is that correct, Eddie?
That's the plan. We're working with Nabarun on the KEP. I think Madhav is working on it too. So yeah, that's the goal.
Correct, and that's the prerequisite so that to actually ship to a separate repo. And then after the initial bits are done, we will be able to consider shipping kubectls faster. I don't know, every month or whatever we figure out want to do. Sean put together that he's planning to work on making server-side apply the default.
Correct. So it's server-side apply is GA and has been GA. The biggest hurdle is actually migration, right? So if there's resources that have been applied with client-side apply, they have the last applied annotation, which is obviously different than the field management metadata for server-side apply. The big question is how do we migrate this? So Antoine actually, I put this on for Antoine. Antoine has started vacation, and I'll be working on this as well. But basically, we need a plan in order to be able to migrate, and we kind of want that to be the default since server-side apply we recognize is the better implementation. This would be the kind of the last piece. So we've been working, or not we, mostly the folks in API machinery and Antoine have been working on server-side apply for 3+ years. And so this would be the last part of it to make this the default in kube control.
I'll play the devil advocate. Are we planning to get rid of the client-side apply?
So that would be a further effort to deprecate client-side apply, but it would, I know that the first step would be just to make the server-side apply the default, and there would be a client-side flag instead of the server-side flag we have now. So I think that we should eventually deprecate it, but I don't see that happening honestly for years. I think that it's going to just be changing which flag is the default and which one you have to actually manually specify on the command line.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
And we have a couple of the experts from the server-side apply here as well. I think Jared and CC are from that team, and so I'll just ask them: does what I just said, does that all sound reasonable? CC, Jared, Kevin?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
One thing I mentioned, sorry. All right, please. All right. So one thing I'm working on is so for now, client-side apply actually have a limitation on object size. So if a CR custom resource is getting too large, it will just get rejected. But Now, for server-side apply, there's no such limitation anymore. So if the user want to apply for a very large, for example, a list, then it is going to take maybe a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds and timeout. So yeah, they still need some performance improvement on the SSA side before we can make it a deploy. That is my opinion.
Okay, so it sounds like there's one more hurdle beyond just the migration. Thanks, Jared.
And Sisi, you have another item, right?
Yeah, I think I guess I'm going to talk about it later. I'm not sure if it's a blocker for making server-side apply default or not, but there is some inconsistent behavior between server-side apply and a client-side apply, and we can talk about it later if you want.
Yeah, I see there's an item added by you. We'll get to it.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Cece.
Katrina, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if the plan for the changes to the flags such that we're making sure that people are making the transition deliberately or it's completely set safe one way or another, if that plan is part of the KEP already, or if that's something we're adding to the KEP as part of this work.
We'll add it to the KEP.
Cool, I'm curious about the details.
Okay, moving on to the next one. Kevin, moving OpenAPI validation from V2 to V3.
Yeah, so I came on here probably 2 months ago to discuss that server-side validation was coming to alpha in 123, and it landed in there. And you know, I discussed kind of the pros of server-side validation versus client-side, and this is for example, the -- validate flag that we have in kube control, and some of the limitations that we have client-side. And so I think the kind of feedback that I got was we're mostly on board with defaulting kube control to using server side, and the link that I provided kind of gives the details of the syntax of how the validate flag is going to work. So i.e. you can still pass it validate true, validate false, but it'll warn you, hey, we're moving to server side, that sort of thing. The big controversial piece though that I think got some pushback on was that we don't want to validate, or we don't want to deprecate client-side validation. And the main reasoning there was that there's a lot of use for when, you know, we have the open API, but we don't have access to the API server, and just giving people some sort of way to know, you know, are they misspelling any of their fields before having hit the server did have a lot of value and isn't something that we can just deprecate. And so I think the question so we went back to the drawing board and kind of discussed, okay, we have this strong desire to get rid of OpenAPI v2. We don't want the client to download that anymore. It's prone with a ton of errors. You know, it doesn't let us validate CRDs that use schema features that prevent us from publishing the OpenAPI v2. There's, you know, no sense of the validating and mutating webhooks. So there's a slew of issues with the OpenAPI v2 validation. But how do we do client-side validation going forward? And the kind of proposal that we landed on is if we can do client-side validation, client-side OpenAPI v3 validation via a tool like kubeval, do we all agree that we can deprecate client-side validation from kube control? And, you know, we could use kubeval as a plugin in kube control or something. But you know, and you know, assuming that we can present a valid client-side solution to validating your objects, does that then free us to deprecate client-side validation? So that's kind of the question that I'm posing in the discussion I wanted to start.
There are two questions that I have. I remember some time ago, it might have been during SIG App Missionary or SIG CLI, there was a discussion about disabling the validate flag by default in kubectl. That's the first one. A second question is, or maybe a suggestion or a statement, with the recent changes to server-side validation, where you can validate CRs using embedded scripting language. I can't remember the exact name of the feature, but it's something that landed in 123, where
validation, and CC, the implementer, she's here.
Yeah, so that's also something that you will not be able to replicate on the client side. So you will always have a difference between the client side and the server side, because if there's a logic that is existing on the server, we can't replicate that through OpenAPI definition.
So just as a point, an item, there's always going to be server-side validation that can't be done on the client side. Like, for instance, if there's a validating webhook. So that doesn't really, yeah, I mean, we're always going to have stronger validation on the server side, no matter what.
Yeah, and to answer your first question about default to ignoring or default to having field validation off, what we were proposing in the KEP is having field validation be warning by default. So we have this option now with the server side validation where we can do the validation server side. We can pass the request and drop the unknown fields like you would with validate equals false, but we'll still return in the warning headers all of the fields that are unknown or misspelled. So we should be able to kind of get the benefits of not forcing people to do validation by default, but also still warn them loudly when they've misspelled replicas as replica or something like that.
Cool, looking forward to it. The next one is Eddie and Mo, kubectl.
Yeah, this was just kind of committing to it. So I talked to Mo this morning, and Mo really wants to push this for 124. So we are going to draft up an initial KEP and get some RFC feedback. So this is, for those unaware, this is separating user preferences and configuration from kube configs. So cloud providers and Kubernetes admins should be able to ship you a kube config that has the server preferences, and you can still have your own user preferences.
Are we thinking about also including, as part of the kubectl file, preferences for plugins? Was this as part of your design process and thoughts?
That's good feedback. I will make sure that gets as a bullet point on the initial KEF drop.
Yeah, I think it will be nice. So this way we would allow a central place, but where additional tools can include, and bonus points for including the entire mechanics in CLI runtime, so that the authors reusing CLI runtime can get at the entire machinery for free.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And the next one is kubectl delete. Also,
so this was the KEP that Katrina and I were working on. It kind of stalled out after a few different ideas and iterations. I'd like to pick this back up, and I'd like to spin up that mailing list thread again. I think last time you and I spoke, Maciej, I was going to do a proof of concept with an admission controller, where we can see what we're doing there. This will play nicely with the kubectl because we can opt in using that by default, right? So I think this will go pretty hand in hand. The flags and all the defaults and stuff, we still have to kind of sort out, but if this lands alongside kubectl, then that makes it a great, nice feature to like show off kubectl in the beginning. So yeah.
Okay, the next one, exit codes. I remember that Ricardo and Ross were pushing the proposal forward. I would really want to see this one getting some more traction, so at least that we can get the proposal out the door, and then we can continue, because that's definitely something that will take some time.
I'm here.
Yeah, I've seen you. I'm waiting.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, before you jump in, Ricardo, so I put this on here, not assuming you'd be here. So I'm glad that you're here so we can discuss what you and I talked about.
Yeah. It was like mostly I got some free time in my agenda right now. I have started passing some information to Ross, but I didn't heard back anymore. I have tried to get some traction inside VMware to see if someone wants to help me, but I didn't got any answer as well. unfortunately. So I've been mostly doing Ingress stuff, so I'm really busy with those Ingress stuff, but I am planning maybe to take a look into that back during the holidays, like VMware shutdown last week. But I would really love if someone wants to help me with that, because I have too much stuff on my plate with all of those Ingress CVEs that I've been watching. And so people discover that now we have CVEs in Ingress, and every week I have one email from CJ asking me to fix something. So
I'll make sure that Ross reaches out to you. I spoke with him. He wasn't able to join us today. He mentioned that there's some weather condition that might affect his participation in lots of work for him today. So, but yeah, I'll make sure that he reaches out to you about this one. Last time that I remember was, I promised to reread the proposal and leave some feedback. I'm hoping to get to it maybe next week when most of the folks will be out. So I'll actually have a little bit of slack to catch up with all the caps and everything else. If not, then probably in the first weeks of January. Like again, I'm just jumping between.
I think you left some comments. I just didn't got some time also to read those, but I will also keep bothering people inside VMware. Like, hey, I need someone to help me on this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing I was going to pitch was we can always send a note to the mailing list and put out a call to the community that this cap needs someone to kind of take up the reins and push it forward. So if that's something you want to do, we can move forward with that too, Ricardo.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can help shepherding this and helping people like taking a look, as the cap was originally on my name. I just don't have enough time right now to take a look into all of the comments.
Yeah, that's totally understandable, my friend. It's more like you paved the way and you kind of put the initial thing in place, and now someone else can pick it up and push it over. So yeah, no ill will against you at all. Totally understand.
Thank you.
And the last topic, I put it here, Sean, but I remember you were working on this before, which is the kubectl metric being sent over through headers.
So it's in beta, it's in default now. They're being sent. The next steps actually have to do with the API server in order to make sure, number one, that they're being surfaced in the logs, and two, excuse me. I also heard, I think from Daniel, that he wanted to send them over to the validating and mutating webhooks so they could be used there as well. Yeah, so that's where that's at now. I think most of it is actually out of our hands, but I could let me take an action item to bring that up with the SIG API machinery.
Yeah, I remember that the current blocking thing, because there are two options that we can do from here. Either we will add a server side, in both are for the API machinery. Either we will add a server side consumer that will expose those metrics through the official mechanism, like we do with all the rest of the metrics, or alternatively, we allow validating or mutating webhooks to have insights into the headers that are being sent. Because if I remember correctly, the issue currently is that the webhooks don't have.
They don't currently get those headers, so they're not passed to the extension API mechanism for those webhooks.
Okay, cool. Would be nice to push. I was actually being asked about a similar topic in the lines of deprecating some other functionality within OpenShift. So it's definitely something of an interest for me as well.
Got it.
Are there any other topics that people want to bring up to the group's awareness about V124 plans? Okay, hearing none. With that, we can jump over to the main topics. Julian, I asked you personally about this one, kubectl dry run. You want to walk us through the issue?
Hi, yeah, thanks for inviting me here. So for this, we have added the support for server-side dry run, and we have had for a while some warnings to deprecate the empty values for kube control dry run and the Boolean values. So I cleaned these up pretty hastily, but I got some feedback after the release that probably ideally we do something better for users because there isn't really any benefit by asking users to choose or set dry run client or dry run server. So we ended up reverting that and cherry picking it for the next patch release. But the question now is what to do with these values. And I'm not quite sure actually. So I think right now it actually might not be a bad place because the intent is to have users ideally use server-side dry run. But I think, ideally, I think we need a plan maybe to switch the default to server-side dry run if that will work for most users. I think that the problem is for people who like generate objects. I wonder if server-side dry run will work for them. Yeah, I think I wanted to get feedback on whether we want to, if we're sure we want to make the default server-side dry run, and if so, then we probably want a proposal for doing that.
Julian, I just had a quick question. I was trying to understand where we're at. So for the patch release, which is going to happen right now, what is the proposal?
Yeah, for the patch release, we just reverted the original change so that we reintroduced the values. So any users who we broke who were using the empty value or the Boolean values, those should start working again. I think people will see errors that those aren't valid values on the .0 release, but when they upgrade, those values will be back and along with the deprecation warnings.
Thanks.
So yeah, 123 is already, cherry pick was also merged. Jordan reached out to me about that particular one. Katrina pointed me out earlier today when we were talking that in the original proposal, and I can probably find it out where the original proposal, there it is. It was mentioned that we will not have a default, or at least that's how it was stated before.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that the intent was to allow users to switch or to specify client or server. Actually, yeah, so I do like that, but maybe that isn't fair to, it seems like there probably is a lot of automation that uses like kube control create with the dry run flag to create to generate objects besides probably the primary use case for previewing an object. And I think that maybe revisiting the plan is a good idea.
Yeah, it would definitely be reasonable to open a cap if you consider changing the default.
Okay.
I guess two thoughts that I have around this would be that maintaining all of those different flags might be a source of confusion for people indefinitely. Like, why do we have so many flags, some of which do the same thing? What does true mean if there's server and client? Like, that adds complexity to the tool indefinitely if we do nothing about it. So I am in favor of doing something. And the original plan I see as like, it is inconvenient to force somebody to to force everyone to go and modify their invocation to specify. But at the same time, I see why we propose that from a safety point of view, whereas it's going to be inconvenient, but it's not going to suddenly change the behavior on anybody, even if they skip through several versions of queue control. There's no case where, that it's suddenly going to do server-side dry run and not do what they thought it was going to do and what it has done indefinitely, because we just flipped a default instead of going through something that makes them aware that that there's a change happening very explicitly. So I guess if we just flipped it, they could start getting a strange error instead of the very straightforward error of you need to pick.
If we were to switch, I would imagine that you would basically get more information because I would require us printing the error similarly to how we print that you should be using dry run with client server or none. And that would just print additional information that in the next release, dry run will be switched, or in the 2 releases, it will be switched over to server by default. The only danger of that approach is that people who are used to seeing a message with the dry run already might ignore the fact that there's another message which says that the default is changing. So I'm a little bit unsure about the right approach here. Going back to the topic of kuberc, yeah, that's where the kuberc could help us with actually in the long run.
So you think we go back to potentially the Boolean values? Well, it can't be Boolean values. At some point, if we don't have a Boolean anymore, then we're still going to run into this problem, whether we have QRC or not. So either we have 5 flags or we have to change something.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy one.
I guess, yeah, definitely some discussion to be had here, as you can see.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My internet dropped for a minute. Yeah, I think probably the original plan doesn't make sense anymore. But yeah, maybe what I can do is it seems like moving to server side as the default might not be bad. I can look into if that would actually be viable. Maybe another option is making the default be client for now, or in the short term. And I'm not sure if that would make sense. Yeah, but I can think about this and follow up with people.
I think it is currently client by default, because if you specify --dry run, it will complain, but it will assume that you pass a true, which translates to client, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, maybe we could. Maybe we could remove that warning, just for the empty value.
I was talking with Jordan about that one. We don't want to remove that warning. That particular warning, yeah, that particular warning should be there because we want to ensure that people are slowly moving towards the client server or non, although I'm not sure what non does. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not clear to me how to best approach the switch from client to server, which with the overall direction of switching to the server by default, I'm inclined to say that it does make sense to push that one as well.
In the same vein of the kuberc thing, I wonder if there's some opportunity to
have an environment variable or something that allows it, like if you really want it to keep that current behavior, you have to set this environment variable so that things work. Otherwise, you're going to get this new, more restrictive behavior that we want. So like, at least it would give people an out. I don't know.
I'd rather use kuberc explicitly than an
Yeah.
environment variable. But yeah, it's just like how much are we going to carry the complexity of all these flags indefinitely? Is the question I have, or can that be part of a transition plan? So yeah, we really don't want to break people's workflows, and we want to move our tool forward at the same time and consider the user experience for people who are newer, in addition to the people who have these things hard-coded everywhere.
So maybe this just becomes dependent on the implementing kuberc, and once we have that, then it becomes easier to transition to this.
Yeah, that would be probably the best, because we would allow people to, well, I want to use the legacy behavior for, I don't know, an additional year. And on the surface, we would have the new behavior already. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. This is definitely something that we will be reconsidering again. So I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Cici, is that correct?
Yeah, Cici. Yeah, just call me Cici. Thank you. And yeah, the topic I propose is actually we just delivered a feature in the past release, which is adding a new validation rules in CRD and CR with the expression language called cell. And while exploring, I found that there are some potential concerns here. The first one would be there is an inconsistent behavior between server-side apply and client-side apply, which server-side apply will so I guess the initial idea is like whatever how many invalidations there, we want users to get all the possible failures back in one shot, so user can like address them together. But the server-side apply will stop processing when met, for example, the type mismatch issue, and stop processing to the further validation, which behaves different than client-side apply. There is an example I pasted there. So for server-side apply, when they met the type mismatch issue, they just stop there and return the errors without processing to the further, say, cell validation. I'm not sure if that's something we want to address, or like it's okay to leave it this way. And another concern is for the returned error message. When server-side apply failing an error, they will try to return the whole object, which caused basically two concerns. One is similar as what Jared proposed. The object might be too large. Second is it includes some goal-specific structure inside the returned message. I'm not sure if that's something we want to address, or it's okay to leave it this way. And I also saw some previous discussion already, because like the initial thought is maybe we should marshal to JSON format or somehow. And then I saw some previous discussion already raised concerns related with this. So yeah, that's just for reference.
Yeah, for the latter, I remember that I think we have a similar problem somewhere else in the validation stack, where we are printing the entire structure instead of a separate field. I think for the error message, I would want to somehow focus users' attention and simplify the error so that it is parsable, because the biggest worry is that from a regular user point of view, that is not a developer, he might not necessarily be aware what the ampersand value unstructured and the rest means. From his point of view, from his or her point of view, beneficial would be to say, oh, expected a string got, I don't know, and try to somehow correlate the type, or expected an array got integer or got string, somehow suggest the error rather than just throwing it at him.
Yeah, maybe that's going to be my proposal. Maybe it makes more sense to return the type instead of the whole object for some
Yeah.
specific case, like the type mismatching, because that's what the previous validation in KubeOpenAPI did. They didn't return the whole object, they only returned the type. But for the rest
Eventually,
of the validation, they still return the object.
Eventually focus in the object, provide the path to a field and then the value of that particular field, so that it is easier for a user to understand, this is what we're complaining about, here's how to get to that particular resource. In the regular validation flow, we usually include the path, how to get to a specific, I don't know if that's, let's say, a name is wrong or annotation is wrong, we'll say that it's metadata dot name, so that the user can actually somehow find it easier or more understandable what the problem is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, the part of the reason I raised this is also I want to know if that's a potential blocker to making the server-side apply default, or like we want to address them before making the server-side apply default.
So the error is not a blocker. I'm still thinking about this one. I'm inclined to say that none of those is a blocker. It is pretty obvious that in both cases, there will be some differences. It's only a matter of documenting those differences. Maybe writing a blog post explaining those differences would be beneficial for users, that we can link to those, even from the warning message, because I assume that we would have a some kind of a heads up for the users that we will be switching the default from one to the other in the near future, and only after the 2 or 3 releases, because if I remember correctly, it's a GA flag, so the usual deprecation period will apply, which is a year or 3 releases.
And also, like, do we want to address this to make it on the server-side apply, the way server-side apply validation align with the client-side apply behavior, which is like instead of stop processing to further validation, we try to hold the errors. And
so I'll give you a tricky answer. I'll leave you to figure it out which one is easier. I don't want to force push a solution that will be harder to maintain, and it will in the long term cause a lot more friction when trying to fix something. So I'm a big fan of simple things. So as long as the user experience will be comparable, which doesn't mean identical, I'm okay with a change.
Am I understanding correctly that this is server-side apply version is returning incomplete validation information in these cases? Because I think that is a meaningful user experience problem, if I'm understanding that correctly. And if it's just for the new validation rules that are themselves in alpha, I would agree that it's not a blocker. But this does seem like a problem that we should solve to me, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, that's correct. That's not a blocker, but it maybe somehow need to address because it brings inconsistent. Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking as a user, like it is far more useful to me if I see all the problems all at once. And it might even be quite frustrating if I fix all the problems and then I apply again and then I see a new list of problems. Like that would be pretty annoying.
I mean, there's still the case of before we change the default from one to the other, we'll have the message for the next year, assuming that we will do it right now. So during that year, you have this much time to figure out how to fix it, basically.
And also, that's tricky here because like the server-side apply still catch the type mismatch error, which will cause the self-validation failure later anyway. And users anyway cannot get all the, if there are potential, say validation rule failures following, but users still not able to see those failures until they fixed the type mismatch issue. So that's tricky because it's anyway caused by the same reason. And user not lose much, I'll say, because they anyway have to fix this first. So it's.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with it from an inconsistency point of view, only from a like information point of view. If the information is complete and useful, then that's fine. It doesn't need to match exactly, I wouldn't say, but if it's not complete and we're missing something that we should be telling the users, then we should fix that.
Cool, thank you. I'll take some time to look at it and update the issue later.
Cool, thanks a lot. Eddie, you're up next for namespace and context envar.
So there's crazy wind outside right now. My power already went out once, so if I drop, that's why. These two issues, this and the next one, came up on our bug scrub last week, and we thought that we should open this for a discussion here. This first one is the user wants to support reading namespace and context from environment variables, and they presented a pretty compelling reason, if I remember correctly, in the issue. I know we're always hesitant to introduce new things, so yeah, I'm definitely hesitant too.
I'm inclined. I remember that we closed an issue similar to this one because
that was for base 64 probably.
No, about
No?
I'm pretty confident that we also had one about namespace where I was hesitant to add a namespace environment variable. Because if you need so, you should, alternative is to use an alias. Similarly, probably with context. And if you need to switch between these two, there are, alias seems to be most reasonable. For namespaces, from my own experience, at least myself, I'm switching namespaces very frequently that I'm not keen on using environment variables for this. It's too tricky. For context, I could be persuaded, but in both cases, you can easily embed, well, maybe not necessarily for context, but for context, I would use an alias, and namespace can be easily explicitly specified within the kubeconfig, such that you don't have to pass the namespace with every single command. And if I remember correctly, our sample CLI plugin does this for you. So if that's the approach, and we have a similar approach in OpenShift, where if you switch to a particular namespace, all the commands from that then on will always use the default namespace that you specified, so that you don't have to always specify the namespace flag. So that would be my preferred approach.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sorry, go ahead, Katrina.
I think if I'm understanding the issue correctly, I empathize with the workflow that they're going for, because I actually used to do that myself at one point. I had a bunch of different terminals where I'm trying to work in one context in one, in another context in another, and I want that to be persistent within the terminal itself. But then if you modify your kubeconfig, obviously it's not. Then you end up with the flags every time, like they're saying. And I had this crazy thing that I was doing where when I opened the terminal, it would actually clone the kubeconfig to give it a unique kubeconfig per terminal that it was using, which you can already do with the kubeconfig environment variable. So it is possible to implement this workflow today. I empathize with the use case, but at the same time, like I totally agree about the complexity of adding another way for these things to be determined. And I think even though I've faced this myself, I would not be inclined to use environment variables to govern this.
I second that as well, Katrina. I think this is a test of, you know, what we get versus the amount of possible ways. So the number of new ways that people are going to be able to break their talking to their cluster where they thought they were talking in this namespace, but you know they had this other environment variable. I think that the safety issues should be the primary issues versus extra functionality. That's my vote.
Yeah, I agree on the namespace front. I wouldn't add an environment variable for namespace. The context one is interesting. I would lean more towards doing that if we did any. And as far as context goes, I think that safety is a problem no matter what, because unless you have your shell prompt telling you what your current context is, you're usually running commands blind. And I know a few people on this call have told me they've made that mistake as well, where they've run a command against the wrong context. So I think that issue is going to pop up no matter what. So I don't think that adding an environment variable to set a context would affect that. But I'm also in the sense of, yes, it is also dangerous. So
basically this nicely follows the discussion that you brought up for delete months ago, where you accidentally remove something because you didn't know that, or you invoke delete all because you didn't know that something was or like a context was predefined through an environment variable. So I'm definitely not in favor of namespace. Context, I could be persuaded to context, but I would prefer no.
yeah. Well, I will link to this discussion on that issue, and we'll see if the author has any thoughts or feedback.
Try looking through issues. I'm pretty confident that there was an issue about that, or ping me after the call. I'll try to find that issue. I can't remember whether that was on kubectl or on the main kube repo.
I've searched all of them, and it obviously could be there, but like GitHub search gives you 1,000 results at a minimum if you look on the Kubernetes issues for anything. And yeah, GitHub search is very hard to narrow down for a project of our size. But if you do find it, absolutely.
And with a flag -- namespace, which is every second issue contains it. Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, with 3 minutes, do you want to go through the kubectl diff, or you want to push that over to the next time?
So actually, I think I'm going to close that issue. I think that it's the issue that they were talking about is actually git diff, and they should, in the best case scenario and the canonical scenario, they should have their configuration under source code control, which would give them the diff of the last applied configuration through just a git diff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think so. I put this on the agenda because I think that there's a discussion we need to have. We don't have to have it today, but we obviously want to push users towards server-side everything and configuration management. And so this feels like an anti-pattern, like Sean said, where your last applied should be the truth, and like to get the difference of the last applied would be the diff from your file to that. So yeah, I agree, but I do think we still need to address like CI/CD and GitOps a bit more from like a CLI standpoint.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. One final question. How many folks will be around next week for customized bug scrub? Because let me give you some background. Majority of us will be out in 2 weeks, so the meeting on the 29th will be canceled. But I was talking to Katrina before this call, and we started wondering how many folks will be around next week to join the customized bug scrub. If there will be sufficient amount of people, we will run it. If most folks, which I'm suspecting, because that's like 3 days before holidays, 2, 3, depending on how you count. If majority will be out, we are inclined to cancel that one as well. So speak now, one way or the other.
I also had the thought that it might be not be a terribly valuable bug scrub, in the sense that if people are about to be off, then committing to something and then forgetting what it was for a few weeks is maybe not the best approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in next week, but I'm personally in favor of just closing whatever is there. So I guess with not that many objections, I will go ahead and cancel all the meetings till the end of this year. So with that, thank you very much all. It's top of the hour already. It was a pleasure to be your SIG chair for 3-4 years, I think. I'm still here. I'm leaving. I'll be just looking at the technical side of things. Enjoy your holiday break, recharge, rest, stay safe, and see you all in the next year. Thank you all.
Thanks, Maciej. Thanks, everyone.